Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to our friends on the West Coast. Welcome to our presentation on how to manage your high-growth culture. Today, our panel of experts will address important questions in culture management, including how to keep your culture strong as your business grows and how to shift your culture when it's time to take it in a new direction. This is a very special presentation because we're joined by our partners at iCIMS, a leading provider of cloud-based recruiting software solutions. My name is Charles Summers. It is my pleasure to be serving as your moderator during this hour. If you want to get in touch with me about future webinar topics, Outmatch specific information, or if you'd like to speak with one of our many talent experts, feel free to reach out by email at csummers@outmatch.com or just chat in your comments. Outmatch is a talent analytics organization providing predictive assessments, culture analytics, and leadership solutions through the #1 talent analytics platform on the market. Our experts can dive into your initiatives, provide solutions, and show you what kind of results to expect. We have a lot of exciting things on our roadmap around culture and leadership, and recently launched our brand new, highly engaging assessments that candidates love. As Outmatch's capabilities continue to grow, we'd like you to grow with us. So when you have a chance, head over to the website and sign up for a future webinar and get a demo on the Pomelo Culture Tool, as well as our newest version of the Outmatch assessment, which provides the best candidate experience yet. We'll also show you how these tools integrate into your native iCIMS ATS. You can sign up for a demo at outmatch.com/schedule-a-demo, and I'll go ahead and put that in the chat box right now. As a thank you for joining us today, all attendees will receive a free copy of our popular infographic, 4 Pillars of Outstanding Company Culture, which provides best practices for creating a culture management strategy. If you'd like the recording from today's presentation, please email me at csummers@outmatch.com or go to outmatch.com/webinars to find all of our on-demand webinars. As I mentioned, we're presenting today's webinar with our partners at iCIMS, so please take a moment to follow us on social media at OutmatchHCM and at iCIMS. You can also interact with us using the questions queue in your GoToWebinar status window. Please feel free to ask questions, make comments, or share feedback at any point during the webcast. You can also ask questions or leave comments on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Now I'd like to introduce our panel host, Catherine Spence. Catherine came to Outmatch from Pomelo, a culture analytics company acquired by Outmatch earlier this year. Catherine co-founded Pomelo and was the company's COO. Now she's Outmatch's culture expert and serves as managing director of the Pomelo Culture Analytics product. So this time I'm going to hand it off to Catherine. Catherine, take it away.
Thanks so much, Charles. Really excited to be here today. And before we get started, what I'd like to do is introduce our 3 fantastic panelists who will be taking part in our culture discussion today. First up, we have Kelly Ann. She is the director of Outmatch's Enterprise Client Success Platform at Outmatch. This means that she works directly with our largest clients to help them identify and address their most pressing talent challenges, from hiring and development to leadership and culture management. We also have Chelsea from Outmatch. Chelsea is a senior talent strategy and solutions partner. She has a background in IO psychology, which she uses to help companies put a strategy around their talent and culture decisions and sustain these strategies for long-term success. And finally, we have Katie, who is a senior manager of customer relationship marketing at iCIMS. Katie has been with iCIMS for 9 years and has been named Manager of the Year, so she knows firsthand what it means to be a great culture fit in a rapidly growing company. Sorry about this. Before we dive into the panel discussion, I want to quickly talk about why culture is so important and why it matters to each of you on the call today. Organizational culture is a super hot topic that's getting a lot of attention in the news and in boardrooms around the world. That's because more and more companies are realizing the connection between a strong culture and strong business performance. It's safe to say the secret is out, and now companies of all shapes and sizes are racing to cultivate a culture that creates a competitive advantage for their business. According to our 2018 People Management Report, 84% of business leaders believe that organizational culture is critical to the success of their business. And I'm sure the majority of you on the call would agree. But how do you build the type of culture that drives business success? And how do you maintain a strong culture even as your business grows, evolves, and in some cases becomes an entirely different company? That's what we'll talk about today. To kick us off, I'd like to start by polling the audience. This poll will give us a sense of where we should focus our discussion today and will help our panelists get to know you better. The question on the poll is, what's your top culture management concern? We'll give you about a minute to answer, and then we will show you the results.
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, so it looks like, about a quarter, now a third have already voted. Now we're up to half. And it's pretty even so far, other than something else. So we'll give it another 30 seconds here. All right, looks like the majority of you have voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and I'm going to share the results.
All right, it looks like we have a fairly even distribution of results, but the winner is navigating change. So growth, mergers and acquisitions, and that's definitely a topic that comes up, I know, a lot in our conversations with customers, and it's one that we'll address directly today. So let's go ahead and move to the first question for our panelists, which is, what are some common misconceptions about company culture? And to kick us off, Kellyanne, can I ask you to share a few of your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thanks, Catherine. So when you think about the idea of shifting or focusing on company culture as your main focal point in a talent strategy, I find too, similar to what we just heard in terms of what's trending right now, is that culture is top of mind for a lot of our enterprise clients and even clients outside of our own kind of niche and book of business. And it's across multiple industries. But this culture that most of my client champions are facing and the shift that's ahead of them doesn't occur overnight. So what they're starting and finding is that they have to begin with gaining buy-in to overcome objections or any apprehension from their executive teams. And a lot of the things that they hear are reestablishing a culture is too costly, and it takes time for us to do that. And we don't have the time, right? So I'm sure some of you on the call hear that quite often as well in terms of your executive leaders. And then another one that I hear a lot is only increases in pay and perks drive culture. The more employees, the better the culture. Or two other ones I've heard that are very common are playtime activities such as like foosball tables or ping pong may help us, but it could just be a waste of time. We need our employees to focus on productivity. So it's all about work, work, work. And then the last thing that really comes to mind is, isn't culture just something we have? Isn't it just, it's not really something we can change. So in essence, a lot of executives think that culture is what it is. So really what we're finding is that understanding the current beliefs or misconceptions of those that I just mentioned really helps the HR and talent leaders with the ability to craft their culture strategy that will actually speak back and resonate with those executives. So really starting with sponsorship at that highest level to overcome any of these types of misconceptions about company culture.
That's some great insight, Kellyanne, and definitely important to get that buy-in on the executive team. Chelsea, I'm wondering if you can weigh in just from the perspective of your IO psychology background. Are there particular misconceptions that you see most commonly when you're working on a project with a client?
Absolutely. So one of the myths that come up often, or misconceptions, is that company culture and employee engagement are the same constructs. Because employee engagement and company culture both involve an individual's relationship with their workplace, it's really easy to see why they get confused, and oftentimes they get measured as if they were the same constructs as well. But really that's not the case. There is a clear distinction between company culture, and employee engagement. Engagement is more about how employees feel, whereas culture is what employees believe and how they act. So that engagement's more the emotional piece, that feeling, and the culture and the strength of a culture is around how values are driving behaviors of your employees. So both are really important for understanding what is happening within your organization. But the formal relationship is that culture strength drives employee engagement. It predicts it. So if you're looking at a way that a way to improve your employee engagement, or you're looking for a business case to start investing in your company culture, keep in mind that the stronger culture, the higher the employee engagement.
That's a great insight, Chelsea, and it's actually a perfect segue into our next question, which is, proceed the slide. What are the business outcomes of investing in your culture? And I was hoping we could get Katie to weigh in on this one first.
Yeah, absolutely. Catherine, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be a part of today's discussion. First off, a strong company culture and business performance are really intrinsically linked. So if you invest in your culture, studies show that your business is going to perform better. But if we get specific with business outcomes, I'd have to bring it back to attracting and retaining top talent. For attracting, a strong culture almost always means that you have happy, hardworking employees. And when you do, they become one of your best channels for recruitment through employee referrals. What better way to fill recs during high growth than through employee referrals? You save on cost per hire, you usually get candidates that have a better understanding of the company and culture, and in some cases, you then have an employee, the person who referred them, really feeling accountable and invested in the new hire's success. Outside of direct employee referrals, if you have a social strategy tied to your company culture, you likely have your employees advocating on your behalf already through Instagram posts or Facebook check-ins about what a great place your company is to work. And this helps influence those top-of-funnel recruitment without any monetary investments in recruitment advertising. Now, when it comes to retaining top talent, times of growth can be tumultuous. Strategies are pivoting, objectives are changing, there may be more uncertainty down the road, and there may be more pressure. But if you can make the upfront investment in your culture, you have the right people for the ride, then that increased retention can save the organization an average of $4,600 in cost per hire to replace them, meaning a direct correlation to the bottom line and productivity of a given team.
That's amazing, and those are some great tactics. And I'm wondering, Kellyanne, if you can build on that, because I know you've worked with a number of different companies now on questions relating to their culture, and if you can share kind of what the biggest impacts have been from making these investments.
Oh, most definitely. And I would piggyback just off of what Katie said and maybe just go a little bit more into detail too in terms of the first and biggest impact I've seen through my customers is being much more attractive to the prospective candidates. So people actually want to join their team. So think of companies like Google, Twitter, Pixar, those companies that really have a great employment brand, but part of that employment brand is their strong culture that they're broadcasting out there. And this actually helps by really increasing their applicant flow overall. So you have much more folks kind of at that top of the funnel, and then you can narrow down who's the best fit from there. And then that low turnover, so that increased retention, it actually, what we're seeing too with a lot of our clients is with that low turnover and a focus on culture, there's less pressure on the recruiting teams and the leaders too. So it kind of is allowing more time to spend on investing in internal talent, being that, hopefully the first thing is happening in terms of increase in applicant flow. So they can really spend a lot of their time investing in what's best for their internal talent, like leadership training or development programs. They're also finding that team members are really much more energized, and this shows in their day-to-day attitudes. So a lot of our clients at the enterprise level are very customer-facing in hospitality, retail, restaurants, healthcare. So what comes to mind is, if you think of that saying that goes out there where people say, happy wife equals happy life, almost the same thing goes for employees, that if your team members are energized and this showcases in their day-to-day attitudes, almost like you have these happy employees, then it really is equal to having happy customers because it becomes infectious. And then the other thing I would say too is that, their communication is so much stronger than it had been before, maybe when a culture wasn't as strong. The communication is reflective of that, and it really has helped these organizations build transparency through increasing feedback, improving some positive behaviors, and really just developing healthy habits and kind of that openness to change. So over time, they see continued growth well into the future as their culture kind of continues to move forward as well in a positive and strong manner.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I think, we've sort of laid the groundwork for understanding how important culture is to business outcomes. So what I want to do is actually shift gears a little bit into sort of the focus for our audience today, which is around really this idea of change and culture shocks. So what changes are most likely to cause a culture shock in an organization? Chelsea, do you have some insight into this?
Absolutely, and it of course relates very directly to some of those concerns we heard about earlier in that poll talking about mergers and acquisitions and organizational structure. So the biggest culture shocks do come from these things. They come from mergers, acquisitions, and restructures because there's so much changing, and the change is happening really fast. Most of the time, this culture shock results in negative outcomes, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. If you're going through a major organizational change, such as a merger or a restructure, be sure to create a culture integration strategy to emerge with a stronger culture and not a weakened one. And so this culture integration strategy, what this is referring to or involves is highlighting and understanding all of the cultural dynamics at play so that you're able to be proactive and not reactive to the culture shock that's occurring due to these large organizational changes.
Yeah, that makes sense, and it rings true from my experience. I'm wondering, Kellyanne, do you have similar experiences in terms of helping steward an organization through a culture shock like this?
Most definitely. So what comes to mind too is just similar to what Chelsea said in terms of how this culture shock might come to be from that major change. The shock itself from working with these organizations, sometimes it takes more time to unveil itself, meaning that organizations might go through that change and then they need time for the dust to settle where, over a period of time after that change, they spent focusing on integrating processes and maybe kind of considering what person or people were right for different roles, if there were duplicate roles, and looking at their overall systems, right? Which is kind of a generic response to any type of merger, acquisition, or restructure. But often that change that took place even after the fact, it continues to occur, right? So it leads to even more of a shock to your overall employees. And the biggest example that comes to mind that this has been playing out is actually one of our largest customers and clients that we work with. Back in 2013, they went through a large merger. So it was kind of the two largest airlines merged in 2013, and one of those obviously were one of our organizations and our clients, and they continue to be today. And this change was huge and positive for them, and really exciting for them as an organization. And what they found is from 2013 to date, it certainly has been a journey of just rediscovery over those last few years. So rediscovery of these new faces, who's working with the company today, what are the new roles they're in, adjusting to a new way of doing things, and just reestablishing or just establishing new goals and expectations. And from that, it's actually led to right now where we're really focused on kind of leading a transformational journey and leadership culture promise. So really, I guess the whole point to kind of explaining is that shock is not just something that happens right after that change. It continues over time. So it's really important, if you use the example of a large airline that I just shared, that it's going to be continuous and you constantly want to stay on top of this and really focus on what is that transformation I want to occur and how do I kind of start to embark on that and then continue it into the future.
Great. And one question that I always have when I'm thinking about, the approach that an organization can take through managing change, managing culture shock is, how do you know the difference between managing and kind of muscling your cultures? How do you know that you're not sort of taking sort of a top-down or overly commanding approach to culture management? Katie, do you want to weigh in here on this one?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks. To me, managing a culture is all about operationalizing it. It's about building and executing a plan, and that really does begin with leadership. They're ultimately setting an example for others. They're articulating that culture to employees. They're making sure that it's embedded throughout the business, from recruitment to meetings to performance reviews. They're making a concerted effort to manage the business's needs to manage and really balance the business's needs with their employees' needs. An example of managing culture would be here at iCIMS every year as part of our strategic planning process. Our executive team reviews our mission statement, they review our core competency, they review our values, and they ensure that these are still accurate to the business we are and the business that we want to become. These items rarely change, but they are still reviewed annually, and then they're reinforced through a number of different ways. If we stick to just talking about core competencies, for example, they're on our career site. They're incorporated into the soft skill interview questions for candidates. Once candidates come on board, those same competencies are reviewed during new hire training. During performance reviews, we have a whole section dedicated to core competency ratings. We give out quarterly awards to a small handful of employees that really exemplify these core competencies. And we reinforce and promote them during each of our quarterly company-wide meetings. Muscling culture, on the other hand, is really when you're forcing it, you're faking it. You're making decisions in a vacuum regardless of whether or not it's a fit for your organization. You probably aren't planning, but instead making decisions and announcements on a whim, and it really causes confusion for employees. It may seem like leadership is shooting from the hip versus articulating a well-thought-out plan that's been validated and reinforced throughout the employee life cycle.
Those are some really great points, Katie. And I'm wondering, Kellyanne, I know that you've had some experience in terms of identifying best practices or practices to avoid. How does that line up with what Katie just mentioned?
Yeah, I would actually piggyback too in terms of just the idea of muscling your culture, right? When we're speaking with some of our clients too, and we think about muscling your culture, the analogy is kind of similar to muscling through a fitness workout. So it's not something you can just pick up and do without educating, training, and effectively building on it to see results. So you can't just say, I'm going to go run a marathon the next day and just do it, right? So the same thing goes in terms of your own employee culture. So for example, you can't just put a pool table up in your employee break room and instantly think you're going to give a healthy culture to that environment, or increase an hourly associate's pay by a certain amount, and that'll instantly ensure long-term retention. So these activities usually just provide a Band-Aid solution. However, to effectively really manage your culture, you want to establish and grow that as your main priority, and really start with your employees. So make them part of this shift. Identify your current culture by even having focus groups with those current employees or sending out a survey, but really involving those employees at all different levels in the organization to understand what is our current culture, and then define that aspirational culture. So what do we want to be? Where do we want to see this shift occur? And then really collect feedback on that. So it's almost as if you're kind of understanding, here's our current culture, here's our aspirational. What's the feedback we get ongoing as we start to kind of incorporate it into current programs, and then ultimately measuring the effectiveness, right? So you can continue to move forward and enhance your programs and really see that culture shift take place to where you want it to be. But then again, like a fitness workout, you constantly have to work at it to really continue to build and grow.
Yeah, so it sounds like collaboration between leadership and employees is kind of a critical feature of managing culture effectively versus muscling it. So that kind of leads us to the next question that I wanted to dive into, which is again along the lines of change and managing a culture in sort of real life environments, but we get lots of questions about keeping culture strong when you have either a decentralized business, so lots of remote workers, or a really fast growing business. And I know these are situations that, Kellyanne, Outmatch has a number of companies that manage culture across a vast number of locations. And so I'm hoping you can share some of your experiences here.
Most definitely. I would even make it even more personal to Outmatch too, right? I mean, in terms of our fast growth and having remote employees across the domestic U.S. as well, where when you have those types of challenges or you have those kind of scenarios happening, in order to keep that strong culture, it almost makes it even tougher, right? In terms of needing to identify new talent, get them up to speed quickly, and build consistency across, especially if there's different regions and you're decentralized globally. Because global organizations, those clients of ours, they really are compounded with even additional elements to maintaining a strong culture. Elements like language barriers, different kind of cultural nuances or norms. And for these types of organizations, the things we really talk and we kind of focus on, we're looking at the overall strategy, but also maintaining that strong culture. It's important, as we kind of mentioned already, to really start at that top, right? That collaboration, but it starts with really sponsorship at your executive level. Really making sure you have that buy-in. You kind of go back to explaining the why behind where we are today and where we want to go and how important it is to get them involved at the highest level. And then identifying key leaders or culture champions, having those kind of key leaders or culture champions be dispersed across the organization. So not just folks who would sit at, say, your support center or home office, folks that are really boots to the ground in the different regions, especially if you're a global organization. So you can keep ties in terms of what your agendas are, what your programs are, and you're building consistencies across that, but these champions can speak to that and really enforce it on a day-to-day, quarterly, or annualized basis too. And that way you're really ensuring across the board that you are managing your culture, not just to those different regions or to your kind of rapid growth, but also ensuring that within the entire talent life cycle, you're beginning with that selection process when it comes to maintaining that strong culture. And it's following through to your onboarding of your associates, your training kind of programs, and then overall employee development. Some of the things that have really been helpful and have impacted the organizations in terms of maintaining this culture has really been leveraging tools and solutions to help them kind of measure that shift over time. That they can certainly see a way that it just helps them understand, here's where we are today, here's where we're going to go, and where are we today in terms of when we first did our baseline measurement of culture and what our aspirational culture is. And then overall, it helps them deliver back to the business too, and to those executives to say, here's an ROI on why we're doing this, and kind of hit the bottom line overall of what's important to the executives in the organization.
Yeah, I think that's true. And managing towards, being able to measure an ROI for your investments is really critical in terms of how you're able to maintain an investment in these types of programs over the long run. And I think you also mentioned, Kellyanne, something that, I want to dive into in a bit more detail, and I know it came up earlier in some of Katie's comments, so I'm hoping I can leverage her expertise here. But one of the things that we're talking about today is growth, and how culture can become part of your growth plan. And very specifically, I think that, Katie, you had referenced some aspects of weaving in culture to your recruiting process and the role that it plays. So I'm wondering if you can comment about, how culture can be leveraged in your recruiting marketing efforts and your sort of recruiter brand.
Yeah, absolutely. For us, an employer brand, it's largely driven by a company's culture, and clearly defining your mission statement and the key competencies that create a productive and strong culture amongst new talent is really going to solidify what's expected. We ask, similar to what we had mentioned earlier, our cultural ambassadors or employee influencers throughout the organization to help man our events, whether we're hosting a job fair and we have alumni from that particular school on one of the teams that we're hiring for, we'll make sure that we have some of those frontline cultural ambassadors there at that job fair. We also do sponsorship tables at summer concert series, and we put our cultural ambassadors on the front line so that potential employees understand what it's like to work at ISIMS. From a digital recruitment marketing perspective, we also make sure that we understand how top talent is looking for jobs, and we make sure that we're where those candidates are. It's important that we're aligned with those job search behaviors. And it's simple, but it's also really important that our job descriptions are accurately reflecting what it's like to work here. Of course, we're going to share our domain specifics, But we also like to go into what it's like to work at iCIMS and how our culture is really unlike any other East Coast-based tech provider. We showcase our competencies and we let candidates know that they can expect a casual but results-driven environment that really embraces innovation. We try to be upfront about what it's like to work at iCIMS so that we make sure that when these candidates come and interview at iCIMS, they really know what to expect, and we know that they're going to be a fit ahead of time.
Yeah, that's definitely spot on. I mean, I think that, so often you see job descriptions and recruiting efforts that feel very, out of the box as opposed to unique. And so, the opportunity to provide your unique culture as part of your recruiting effort is really something that's a low-cost way to attract the right people to your organization, and definitely deliver, greater value from your recruiting efforts. On the topic of sort of delivering value, I wanted to make sure that we covered an important point, which we've touched on already to a certain degree, which is really around how you know if your efforts to improve your culture are effective. So we know we're talking a lot about managing culture through change. We know we've talked a lot about the importance of buy-in from the executive team and the need to measure ROI. But I'm curious to get actually everybody's view here. And maybe Chelsea, if you want to start off and kind of comment on sort of, what are the markers that you look for in terms of improvement in culture?
Yeah, absolutely. So of course, the most obvious answer here is if you've been able to measure or monitor your culture from the start, you're much more likely to be able to identify where those areas that culture isn't strong, where are those areas that are weakening, where are those areas that we're seeing improvement. One of the easiest ways for you to be able to see this, even if you aren't quantitatively measuring your culture, is how contextualized your values are throughout communications and interactions between your employees. So the more that employees are able, in management especially, are able to embed values into the way that they're rewarding employees, the way that they're giving feedback, the way that they're prioritizing their tasks and their roles, then the more you're going to be able to feel the effects of that culture strength.
Got it. That makes sense. And Katie, what about you? I know that you have a lot of experience, particularly in the recruiting space. How do you see, measuring efforts to improve culture as playing out?
Yeah, I love this question. We're a really metrics-driven organization, so every aspect of our business is really measured. We have metrics in place. We have leading indicators to make sure we're on track. At a bare minimum for improving your culture and measuring those efforts, I think we touched on this a little bit before, but you can begin surveying your employees, whether you do it internally or through a third party like Best Places to Work. You can find out what's working, find out what could use improvement, and then use these results as a way to benchmark your company and your departments. And don't stop at surveying. Put together a task force that goes through these results and really focus on making those improvements. We actually recently just put together a peer leadership council within our marketing department. And while we may be working with HR to partner on survey responses that are related to pay or benefits, we've assembled a small group with one representative from each of our sub-departments to help uncover actionable items to improve employee engagement. We're doing this by specifically engaging influential individual contributors. And while we just started this over the summer, we expect that the output for this council would be to execute on the actions identified through their research and peer listening that really align with the business needs. In a little bit less of a scientific way, but still pretty noticeable, you can start by looking at the talent that's interested in your company. If you're a recruiter or a hiring manager, you'll definitely notice when the caliber of talent coming to our organization is better than what it once was. As someone who's been with iCIMS for almost 10 years now, I can see the difference in the caliber of talent that we've gotten as our recruitment brand has grown. Also, if you see your offer acceptance rate increasing, the number of offers accepted divided by the number of offers, that's a pretty good indicator that you're an employer of choice and that the efforts that you put forth to improve your culture are becoming effective. It also means that you get to be a little bit more selective with the talent coming into your organization, which is not a bad thing or a bad power to have.
And I would add on to that as well, is not only are you going to start seeing more people attracted to your organization, you're also going to see retention improve. And even when you do have turnover occurring, if you're able to leverage any sort of exit interviews, things like that, it's a clear indicator of why people are leaving. If you start to see more positive feedback on the culture, it gives you an opportunity to measure that culture strength and see if you're improving.
Yeah, definitely. And so, we hear so often how important metrics are, and they're kind of the outcome that we're always driving towards. So we've sort of laid the framework in this discussion so far of, understanding how to conceptualize culture, ways that it enters into your sort of day-to-day practices, and ways that culture change is particularly challenging. So hopefully at this point we've convinced at least a few people that this is an interesting initiative to invest in their own organizations. And I wanted to get everybody on the panel to comment on, sort of where do you begin when you're pursuing a new cultural vision? And Kellyanne, if I can kind of ask you to kick us off here, and when you're just launching into this type of project with a company, what do you advise that those leaders think about?
Sure. So, I guess this is going to come without saying, but I think the first thing to get started is reach out to Outmatch, right? Or ISIMS. So we're on this call to kind of probably share with you a little bit more of our knowledge and understanding. But part of what we have in our toolkit too is kind of this way that we can consult around where you do begin. And each of that beginning part of a process could be different and vary by company depending on where they are in terms of culture, in terms of the kind of happenings within the organization. But really at the core of it, it kind of starts with having that discussion, helping them define what is your current culture, even if it's just kind of anecdotally having discussions to really understand what is that culture, what are those values and motivators that exist today, and having conversations not just with their executive team around this, but also, again, maybe roundtables and focus groups with other folks within the organization at different levels, so you can really start to understand how you can define these values and motivators and overall culture and what it means at those different levels or within different teams too, right? And by doing that, you're really trying to get a baseline of what it is today. What is that culture today? And then leverage a tool, right? If you can be a little bit more kind of quantitative in your approach. So using metrics and data to really drive where you are today, and then use that as your baseline in terms of where you want to go. So not to kind of pitch, but to pitch one of our solutions, Pomelo is really a great way to kind of start in terms of giving you that quantitative measurements, right? So helping you to use this tool and solution to really understand that baseline, really define your aspirational, and from that information, from that data you collect, really help you in terms of how do we align this with internal programs. And maybe it's starting small, right? In terms of we're going to build this into our selection process and into how we give a realistic job preview with our candidates. Or maybe it's a little bit more where you're going to actually measure culture fit within your selection process. But then also carrying it through beyond selection and into all of your communications and activities with this specific initiative. I think it goes back to exactly what Katie was saying with what ISIMS does today. It really becomes, this culture initiative kind of becomes part of almost your everyday, and it's really reiterated through everything you're doing. But importantly, you want to really gather feedback again through that specific initiative and do that at a point in time that makes sense for you. A lot of my clients are starting to really leverage, again, kind of applications or feedback tools. Maybe it's not just an engagement or pulse survey, but it's really a feedback tool that's going to say, I want to gain feedback in the moment around kind of, at the employee level or employee to supervisor level. So almost an in the moment 360 to really help them understand where we are today and really fostering that culture as they're moving forward. and then using all that to really measure it over time and make any shifts they need to get to where they want to be.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And Katie, maybe you can weigh in here as well. In terms of starting out with a cultural vision or an aspirational culture, how do you advise the customers that you work with and that you see at ISIMS when there is the recognition that there is a gap between where you are now and where you want to be in the future? What do you see most commonly, particularly as it relates to recruiting and hiring?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you my top three, and I think these are pretty thematic to what we've been talking about over the course of the webinar. First and absolutely foremost, hire for fit. Our CEO, Colin Day, has always reinforced just how important it is to hire the right people. His philosophy is that weak managers tend to be threatened by people who are more talented than them, and great managers hire only people who are more talented than them. He pushes us to find the next great candidate by focusing on work ethic, drive, passion, and manners. We like people who work hard and respect each other, and it really shows here at the culture in ISIMS. And so many of our customers also value the candidate experience and value how important talent is. And we see this coming through with our customers. The second piece, really treating your team right, finding out what's important to your employees and finding ways to deliver it. At ISIMS, our health insurance is paid for in full. We offer 401k matching, pretty generous PTO. I've been incredibly lucky to have great health insurance the last 10 years of my life. And I think the 401k matching came a little bit later, and the new holidays came from employee feedback. And it really came from our leadership team's willingness to listen to employees and find ways to deliver, find that balance between what employees are looking for and what the business is able to offer. And then the third piece, really just constantly reviewing your culture. I mentioned it before, our leadership team reviews our company culture on an annual basis. Culture isn't a one and done box to check. It's something that really needs to be reviewed and improved upon. And I can't stress, especially during periods of growth, don't let culture fall by the wayside.
Yeah, I think that's very, very true. And Chelsea, I know you have some thoughts on, kind of what you would describe as the factors that are most critical to a successful culture change. What are a couple things that you look for a company that's moving into a period of culture change, and what would you advise a company to focus on?
So where I have seen companies fail to successfully change their culture, strengthen your culture, is at the leadership level. Leadership really needs to make a concerted effort to not only talk about the culture, but really walk that walk, live the culture. And not only to live it, but to ensure that it's visible. People are recognizing that leadership is proactively living the new culture that they're striving for. This can be difficult. Leaders really have to be thoughtful. They have to be proactive to find ways to embody, communicate, and recognize the values that they're trying to cultivate, especially when they're far removed from frontline operations, from those, the majority of their employees. So I would say that that's the most critical component to ensuring that the cultural vision is carried through and effectively implemented, is getting leadership to really understand that they can't just talk it, they have to live it.
Absolutely. So at this point, we've come to the end of our panel questions, but Chelsea gave us the perfect segue around sort of the focus on leadership, and I'd like to turn it over to our audience. I know we've been gathering questions throughout the webinar, and so if Charles, you'd like to take over and help us kind of work through some of the questions that have come in from the leaders who have been listening in today, I think that would be a great next step.
Yeah, for sure. And we do have a handful of questions. We've got about 14 minutes left here, so we've got some time. And as we work through these first couple of questions, please feel free to use the questions queue and get your questions in there. We'll try to get to them here. So the first question, and Catherine, I think this might actually be a question for you with your Pomelo experience. what is more important, engagement or culture?
So I think that that's an excellent question, and it's a hard one to answer. I don't think that they are. I don't think one is more important than the other. I think they are both required in order to manage your organization effectively. And when I break it down, sort of from a methodology perspective, I'd say that engagement is like a thermometer. It tells you what's going on in your organization right now. Are you running a fever? And is there an issue? And it's very helpful because engagement does actually change quite frequently. So levels of engagement fluctuate quite a bit over time. They fluctuate for a wide variety of reasons. But you do really want to pay attention to what does that look like over time? The reason for that is that, you know, if you take just one engagement survey per year, you're going to get 1 point in time, and you don't know if that's truly reflective of your organization or if if the scores are particularly low, if actually, you know, on average, your engagement is much higher. So it's important to have that frequent touch point of, you know, where is my organization? Now, where culture comes into play and provides a different kind of sort of action item list is, whereas engagement can tell you if you have a problem, culture can really help you drive solutions to that. So most often when we see issues of engagement arising in an organization or a specific part of an organization, it's usually because there is some underlying cultural issue. Now, it might be a reorganization, it might be a leadership change within that part of the organization, it might be more granular, but that engagement will tell you there's a problem, and the culture data will tell you where is the source of this kind of dissonance coming from. So specifically, in the case of, say, a leadership change within a part of an organization, a set of culture data will really guide you in understanding, okay, well, employees have been in an environment where one thing was communicated as most important, but now with this new leader, they're in an environment where something else is being communicated as most important. And managing that adjustment will be much easier if you have the data that tells you that is what is going on.
Catherine, and so I have kind of one follow-up to that with another question that came in. Where do you start, like, when it comes to measuring the culture itself?
So there's really a couple different approaches that you can take. I think at small companies, you really are seeing the approach to measuring culture as being driven largely in sort of an analog way. It'll happen organically through managers having conversations with their teams and communicating that up to the leadership team. That feedback loop is basically a way of the leadership team understanding, here's what we think we're communicating, and the employees saying, here's what we're hearing from you is most important. Here's how you want us to behave. This is what you want us to prioritize. Now, in a larger organization, which happens pretty quickly, usually around 100 or 200 employees, it becomes completely unscalable to manage and have an accurate gauge of what's going on in your culture without some form of tool. So this is where we dive into solutions like Pomelo, which is a very focused solution that was developed specifically for measuring and managing company culture. And the benefits there are that it's a science that we have devoted a lot of time to understanding. You can do other types of solutions like a SurveyMonkey, which is sort of a do-it-yourself, and you could field a survey and kind of gather information that way. But that is typically, where you would start how you would start thinking about, okay, how do we measure culture, and what's the right tool for us given our size. Once you have the metrics in place, you will be guided by the data to understand, where are there potentially fires burning that you need to pay more attention to. And that's the opportunity where you can go back into that kind of focus group, individual conversation setting, and really uncover from that data a better understanding of the story of kind of, what's happening in this part of the organization, and structure an action plan around that.
Yeah, and so it probably varies quite a bit across different organizations, but is there one metric that's maybe most important that you see across, and I'll open this up to everybody, but is there maybe one metric that's most important, maybe that we see across all organizations that we need to measure?
So this is Catherine again. I'd put it, if I had advised a company to look at one metric to start, I'd look at overall cultural alignment. You can measure that in a variety of ways. At Pomelo, we have a specific culture survey, and we look at how similarly or how much correlation is there in the way that individuals observe the culture around them. What that tells us is there a shared understanding of the culture in this organization? When that number is very high, it means that communication, incentives, recognition programs are all really well aligned around the culture. When we see that number very low, it usually means that communication, incentive programs, recognition programs are misaligned, and potentially that there's some other activity going on, maybe a strategic change, maybe some M&A activity that might be disrupting the culture separately. So that's where I usually advise that companies start.
Perfect, thank you. And I'm going to direct this next one to Katie, based on your comments on employment brand earlier. I've got a question here on how do you come back from a poor culture, and maybe Kellyanne, you can chime in too on your airline client. But how do you come back from a poor culture, bad Glassdoor reviews, etc.?
Yeah, so definitely don't let those sit. You have to be an active part in your Glassdoor reviews. So first and foremost, make sure that you're monitoring them and make sure you're responding to them. And when you respond to them, don't be defensive in your response. If an employee might have, maybe it's a fair criticism of what it was like to work at an organization, and maybe it's not fair, and maybe that maybe there does need to be a response that's a little bit more pointed. But at iCIMS, we make sure that we're monitoring those Glassdoor reviews. Something that I think we do pretty well here is we include Glassdoor reviews as part of new hire onboarding. So once employees go through our onboarding program, which is 2 weeks in length at the corporate level, and then it goes through the first 90 days at the departmental level. And actually, while we're on this webinar, I just got an email that our onboarding program was just recognized by Brendan Hall as one of the best onboarding programs in the country, so shout out to iCIMS there. But during the onboarding process, at the end of 90 days, we reach out to all those employees that just went through new hire onboarding, and we ask them to leave a review on Glassdoor about what their experience was for those first 90 days at iCIMS. And it really helps with attracting candidates so that they understand that, when you are applying for a job at iCIMS or when you're looking to join a company like iCIMS, that, you're going to be given the direction that you need, and here's what you can expect in helping to get up to speed.
Perfect. Thank you. That was a great response. Super helpful. I'm going to open this one up to the group. I'm not sure who the best person for it's going to be, so feel free to just chime in as soon as I'm done reading the question. Hello, my question is, how do you recommend dealing with leadership that talks but doesn't walk? Specifically at the C-level, it feels one thing is said, another is done.
So I can jump in there, Charles. It's Kellyanne. So it's interesting that's brought up because I hear that quite often, especially with much larger clients like the enterprise ones we work with. And I actually would go back directly to my airline client, which I think we probably all figured out is American Airlines, right? And they actually had a very similar situation even recently in terms of what they found in their engagement surveys and what they really wanted to put forth when they were looking at transformational and their culture promise. And part of that was exactly what you just shared. Kind of they pointed it out to be more of a listening component. So what they did is they actually used that listening component and built kind of an entire program around this listening component, where on the front end, they're really gathering kind of a 360 feedback and getting coaching one-on-one for the participants of this program. And then post that, they're doing kind of a workshop, a 1 to 2 day workshop, where they're really spending hands-on and really understanding kind of what it means to be a good listener, what it means to really walk the talk and talk the walk, right? And then as part of that, to really have it be kind of sustainable and be put into action, there's really a follow-up in terms of kind of this, not even just touch bases with coaching ongoing, but also kind of this feedback application. So they're leveraging technology that's actually a partner of ours too, where they're having this feedback app go out and they're really asking that, you know, they share access to this feedback app where they can really have their employees, their supervisors, or even colleagues of them when they interact on a daily basis, kind of put either positive or constructive feedback in there and really focus on not just the listening component, but also any other core kind of leadership attributes or core competencies that they want to drive moving forward. And in doing that, what they're doing is starting really at the C-suite level, because they find that that was the biggest disconnect in their organization. And it really came out in their engagement survey specifically, where frontline leaders really felt that, you know, they were being told certain things, but they didn't feel as if the leadership was embodying it, right? So it was kind of going on deaf ears when it got to the front line, and then back up when they were sharing feedback to leadership teams. So they kind of put this entire program in place. I don't necessarily think you have to do a full-blown program. I think you can start small, but I think making kind of your leaders aware of the feedback that you're getting from different levels in the organization, because I think it starts with kind of making them aware and building that self-awareness for them. And then after they're kind of aware, work with them to really gain buy-in as to how can we work on this and what's the best way to address it, because here is some evidence within the organization that it's affecting not only our employee morale, but maybe also other pieces of the organization like productivity or business overall.
Perfect. Super insightful. I appreciate that. And we had one more question. Unfortunately, we're out of time. So Brian, I will have one of our experts reach out to you to answer that question. But I just want to first thank everybody for joining us today. And I especially want to thank our friends at iCIMS and our panelists and Catherine for helping us out today on this webinar. So in our next webcast, we'll discuss talent acquisition challenges, including applicant flow, drop-off, candidate experience, and more. So I hope to see you all again next month. If you want to listen back to any of our previous webinars, please go to outmatch.com/webinars or email me at csummers@outmatch.com. Appreciate it and see you next month.